Now that we've got support for ES6 and React syntax, although we still have to actually build and serve our project, we'll see how to do that in a coming video, we're going to create 3 files inside of our source folder. This is the first actual React code that we're going to write here. The first file that we're going to create is going to be called index.js, and this will contain the code that inserts our React app into our index.html page. And then we're going to create 2 more files, one called app.js, and the other called app.css. And these 2 components will contain the code and the styling, respectively, for the root component of our application, which for now will be the only component in our application. So we're going to code this component first, open up app.js, and we're going to write the following code. We're going to say import React from React, and then import app.css, and then we're going to say const app equals, and we're going to make this a functional component here. And for now, our component is just going to be a simple div. We'll say class name equals app, so that we can add styling later on. And then we'll say h1 hello world. Nothing too complicated here right now. And finally, down at the bottom, we're going to say export default app. And now let's move over to our app.css file and just add in some very basic styling. It doesn't have to be anything too complicated. So we'll say .app, and we'll give it a margin 1 rem, font family, we'll say Arial, Helvetica, sans serif, and we're going to say color. We'll just say 222222. So that's our very basic React app so far. The only thing we have left to do is write the code that will actually render our app component that we just created into the index.html page that we defined. So here's how we do that. We're going to open up the index.js file that we created, and we're going to add this code into it. We'll say import React from React, import React DOM from React DOM, and finally we're going to say import app from app.js. And down here is where the actual rendering is going to take place. What we're going to say is React DOM.render, and we're going to render our app component into document.getElementById root. So we're going to be finding our root div that we defined in our index.html and rendering our app inside that. And last but not least, we have to actually install React and React DOM, these 2 packages we're using up here, so that we can use them in our app. So we'll say npm install React and React DOM. And that's all we need for now. The only thing we have left to do is set up Webpack to build and serve our project for us. So now that we've got a very simple React app set up, we need to set up Webpack to actually build our app. And what we're going to have Webpack do for us is take the code in our source directory and perform some operations on it, like converting the ES6 syntax and JSX to CommonJS, and then host our public directory so that we can view our app in a browser. Before we get started, let me just say that this is probably the least fun part of the whole process, especially if you're not familiar with Webpack. But bear with me, I'll explain everything that goes into our Webpack configuration and how it helps us. So the first thing we're going to do is install all of the packages that we'll need. So open up a terminal in our React Ecosystems directory here, and type npm install --save dev webpack, webpack CLI, webpack-dev-server, style loader, CSS loader, and finally Babel loader. And we're going to hit enter and run this, and that's going to take a little while. And before we go on, if you really want to make sure that you're getting the correct versions of the packages we just installed, especially Webpack, you can take a look at my versions in the package JSON here. If you find that Webpack isn't quite behaving correctly for you, you can always specify the versions that I have here. and it should work exactly as it did for me. So the next thing we're going to do here is create our Webpack config file that will allow us to define what exactly we want Webpack to do with our source code. So we're going to create a file in our base directory here and call it webpack.config.js. And then inside this file, we're going to write a bunch of code. So again, bear with me here. So first we're going to import a few things, path and Webpack. And note that since Webpack will be the thing that's actually transpiling our code from ES6 to CommonJS, the Webpack code itself is usually written in CommonJS. So that's going to look like const path equals require path, const Webpack equals require Webpack. And now we'll define our only export, which will be a JavaScript object that contains a bunch of configuration data for Webpack. So we'll say module.exports. Again, this is ES5 syntax here. And first we have to define our entry point for Webpack, which will be the index.js file, since that's the one that imports all the others. /source/index.js. And we're going to specify the mode, and we'll have Webpack in development mode here. And now we have to specify the rules for exactly how we want Webpack to transform our code. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Webpack, Webpack does this by using what are called loaders, basically packages that Webpack uses to transform code in some way. So for example, the first rule we'll define will be to transform our ES6 code to regular JavaScript, and that'll look like this. We first have to define a module property, and that's going to be an object. And then inside here, we need a property that's called rules, and that's going to be an array. And the first rule here, as I said, will be to transform our ES6 code to regular JavaScript. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here again, but this will just have a property test, and it's a regular expression, so / / dot parentheses JS pipe JSX $. Don't worry if that doesn't make sense to you, that's just matching all of the JS and JSX files. And we're going to say exclude /node_modules, because we don't want it to look inside our node modules folder. And then the loader we want to use is our Babel loader. And finally, we want to specify options, and that's going to be an object that says presets Babel/env. And that's it for that rule. Next up, we're going to add the style loader and the CSS loader, and that allows us to do this thing where we import a CSS file at the top of our React components, like we did in app.js. We have to remember to add a comma up there. And then we're going to say test / /\.css $/ comma, and then we're going to say use style loader and CSS loader. And that's it for our rules. The next thing we'll add to this conversation is the resolve property, and make sure you add that outside of here. We're going to say resolve object extensions array, and that's going to be star.js and .jsx. And next up, we'll define our output files, which will look like this. Output object path path.resolve __ dir name, and then dist /, and then public path is going to be /dist/. Make sure you get all these slashes right, by the way. And then we're going to say file name bundle.js. And next we're going to define some things for our development server, which again will allow us to view our React application in a browser. And that'll look like this. We'll say dev server object content base path.join __ dir name public / port 3000. Public path is going to be http // localhost 3000 /dist /, and then hot only is going to be true. This is something we'll talk about later. And one last thing, outside of dev server, we're going to say plugins. And that's going to be an array with one item. That's new webpack.hotModule replacement plugin, parentheses. And that's it. Now comes the exciting part. We can build and serve our React application by running npx webpack dev server -- mode development. And we can see that we got an error, and that is because this is not public. It is public path. So if we change that and save it and try and run it again, we see that it runs successfully. So now if we open up a browser and navigate to localhost 3000, we'll see the app that we just created. So now that we've built ourselves a working React app from scratch, it's time to take a look at the application we're going to be building throughout the rest of the course. The app that we're going to be creating, as is pretty typical with many courses, is a basic to-do app that keeps track of things that we want to get done. So our app is going to allow us to create new to-do items. It's going to allow us to mark these to-dos as completed. And finally, it's going to allow us to remove these to-dos. Now, this might seem like kind of a simple app, but I've found that it's a very good way to demonstrate how to add different React ecosystem components to a React application. So, without further ado, let's get started with building the very basics of this app, and then later on, we'll use the ecosystem pieces to add more and more functionality to it.